Anna, if you see this woman, you will run away. I have never seen someone so serious in my life. She never smiles, never jokes, never laughs. Honestly, I think she's unmarried. Why? Because no happy married woman behaves like that. Or maybe something is seriously wrong at home.
Anna, if you see this woman, you will run away, Cynthia said between laughter as she ate her lunch. I have never seen someone so serious in my life. She never smiles, never jokes, never laughs. Honestly, I think she's unmarried. Her friend burst into laughter on the other side of the phone. Why? She asked. Cynthia shook her head. Because no happy married woman behaves like that. Or maybe something is seriously wrong at home. The two friends laughed even harder. But suddenly, if Cynthia had turned around, that laughter would have died instantly. Standing just a few feet behind her was the woman they were talking about, Madame Angela. Silent, expressionless, listening to every single word. Then, something happened that nobody saw. Something that would change everything. A tear slipped down Angela's face. Then another. She quickly turned away and walked off before anyone could notice. No confrontation, no shouting, no warning. Just tears. But why would a woman feared by an entire office cry over a casual conversation? What secret pain was she carrying behind that cold expression? What had happened to the woman everyone called wicked? And why did those careless words hit her like a knife straight through the heart? The answer was something nobody in that office could have imagined. Because behind every angry person is a story. And Angela's story was darker, more painful, and more shocking than anyone could have guessed. Before we uncover the heartbreaking truth that changed her life forever, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Trust me, this is one story you will never forget. Many years earlier, Angela was nothing like the woman people knew at the office. Back then, she was full of life. Her laughter came easily, and whenever she entered a room, people naturally smiled. She was beautiful, not just because of her appearance, but because of the kindness she carried in her heart. She worked hard, treated people with respect, and believed that good things came to those who remained honest and patient. Angela had dreams. She dreamed of building a successful career. She dreamed of raising a happy family. Most of all, she dreamed of finding a man who would love and respect her for the rest of her life. Then she met Kelvin. The first time Kelvin spoke to her, he made her feel special. He listened carefully whenever she talked. He remembered the little things she said. He called her beautiful, even on days when she felt ordinary. Whenever Angela doubted herself, Kelvin always seemed to know exactly what to say. Angela, he would tell her with a smile, any man who lets you go would be making the biggest mistake of his life. Those words made her heart flutter. Day after day, Kelvin showered her with attention. He brought gifts she never asked for. He sent sweet messages throughout the day. He spoke about the future as if it had already been written. One day, he would say while holding her hand, we will grow old together. No matter what happens, I will always stand by your side. Angela believed him. Why wouldn't she? Everything about him seemed perfect. He was charming, he was caring, he was romantic. He looked like the answer to every prayer she had ever made. So, when Kelvin finally got down on one knee and asked her to marry him, Angela cried tears of joy. Yes, she whispered through her tears. Of course, yes. In that moment, she felt like the luckiest woman in the world. She truly believed she had found her soulmate. But sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who first convince us that they would never hurt us at all. After the wedding, things were wonderful for a while. Angela was happy. She looked forward to seeing her husband every day. She believed she had everything she had ever wanted. Then, little things began to change, so little that she barely noticed them at first. One evening, she served dinner after returning from work. Kelvin tasted the food and frowned. Is this what you spent all that time cooking? He asked. Angela laughed nervously. What do you mean? Is there something wrong with it? Kelvin pushed the plate away. Forget it. You never understand simple things. The words stung, but Angela quickly brushed them aside. Maybe he had a stressful day. Maybe something was bothering him. Another day, she excitedly showed him a project she had completed at work. Instead of congratulating her, Kelvin shrugged. People get promoted every day, Angela. It's not that special. Her smile disappeared. I just thought you would be happy for me. Kelvin rolled his eyes. Why are you always looking for praise? Again, she told herself not to overthink it. Maybe he was tired. Maybe tomorrow would be better. But tomorrow never became better. Slowly, the insults became more frequent. The criticism became harsher. The warmth he once showed her began to disappear. Conversations that used to bring comfort now brought pain. One evening, Angela sat beside him and said softly, Kelvin, have I done something wrong? You seem angry with me all the time. Kelvin looked at her with irritation. Everything cannot be about your feelings, Angela. Stop acting like a victim. Angela lowered her eyes. I'm only trying to understand. Well, stop trying, he snapped. You are becoming exhausting. The words hit her harder than she wanted to admit. As time passed, it became impossible to please him. When she cooked, he complained. The food is too salty. The next time she adjusted the recipe, he complained again. Now it has no taste. When she cleaned the house, he found fault. You missed this spot. When she worked hard to support the family, he complained she cared too much about work. When she took time to rest, he accused her of being lazy. No matter what Angela did, it was wrong. No matter how hard she tried, it was never enough. The man who once called her greatest blessing now spoke to her as though she was a burden. Some nights, Angela would sit alone after everyone had gone to sleep. She would stare into the darkness and wonder what happened to the man she fell in love with. She would replay old memories in her mind, searching for answers she could not find. Then she would wipe away her tears before anyone saw them. Tomorrow will be better, she would whisper to herself. Maybe tomorrow he will change. But tomorrow never changed. Instead, the woman who once felt beautiful slowly began to feel worthless. The woman who believed in herself started doubting everything she did. The woman whose laughter could brighten a room slowly learned how to cry in silence. As the years passed, Angela began to see a painful truth she had spent so long trying to ignore. Kelvin did not just refuse to change, he refused to take responsibility for his own life. Every morning came with a new excuse. Every week came with a new story. Every month came with another reason why nothing was his fault. Whenever Angela asked him about getting a job, Kelvin always had an answer ready. The economy is bad, he would say while stretching lazily on the couch. A few weeks later, it became, there are no good opportunities. Another month passed and he blamed his family. If my relatives had supported me, I would have been successful by now. Sometimes it was the government. Sometimes it was his friends. Sometimes it was bad luck. According to Kelvin, the whole world was responsible for his problems except Kelvin himself. Yet Angela noticed something strange. Whenever there was money for school fees, Kelvin had none. Whenever there were bills to pay, Kelvin was nowhere to be found. Whenever the landlord came knocking, Kelvin suddenly disappeared. But somehow, there was always money for alcohol. There was always money for parties. There was always money to impress his friends. There was always money for women who were not his wife. The burden of the family rested entirely on Angela's shoulders. She woke up before sunrise and worked until her body ached. She paid the children's school fees, she bought food, she paid rent, she settled bills. She made sure the children had clothes to wear. She made sure there was food on the table. She carried the family like a woman carrying a heavy basket on her head while walking a long, dusty road alone. Yet, despite everything she did, Kelvin never appreciated her sacrifices. One evening, After returning from work exhausted, Angela placed bags of groceries on the table. Her feet hurt. Her back hurt. All she wanted was a moment of peace. Instead, Kelvin glanced at the bags and frowned. "Is this all you bought?" Angela stared at him in disbelief. "Kelvin, I paid the rent yesterday. I paid the children's school fees this morning. This is what I could afford." Kelvin shook his head. "You are always making excuses." Angela's eyes widened. "Excuses? I'm the one paying for everything." "And whose fault is that?" Kelvin snapped. "You always want people to praise you for doing what you're supposed to do." Angela felt her heart sink. No matter what she did, she was always wrong. No matter how much she sacrificed, it was never enough. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Angela sat quietly on the edge of the bed. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she stared into the darkness. Beside her, Kelvin slept peacefully. She wondered how someone could sleep so comfortably while watching another person carry the weight of an entire family alone. Many nights became like that. Nights filled with silent tears. Nights filled with unanswered questions. Nights filled with loneliness. Yet, every morning, Angela wiped her face, looked into the mirror, and forced herself to smile. Not for Kelvin, for her children. Whenever they ran into her arms before school, she smiled. Whenever they showed her their schoolwork, she smiled. Whenever they laughed, she laughed with them. Because they deserved happiness. They deserved stability. They deserved peace. They deserved a mother who would never stop fighting for them. But every sacrifice has a price. Every burden leaves a mark. And little by little, the weight Angela carried began changing her. The pain she buried at home did not disappear. It simply followed her elsewhere. It followed her into the office. At first, the changes were small, so small that she barely noticed them. One morning, a junior staff member made a simple mistake in a report. Normally, Angela would have corrected it kindly. Instead, she snapped, "Can't you read before submitting your work?" The young employee looked shocked. Angela immediately felt guilty. A few minutes later, she walked over and apologized. "I'm sorry, I've had a stressful day." The employee nodded politely, and Angela promised herself it would never happen again. But it happened again, then again, then again. The frustration she swallowed at home slowly poisoned her behavior at work. Her patience became shorter. Her tone became sharper. Her anger became easier to trigger. Employees began avoiding her office. They became nervous whenever she called their names. A small mistake could earn a harsh lecture. A simple misunderstanding could become a public embarrassment. Sometimes she would see fear in the eyes of her staff, and deep down, she hated herself for it. But by then, the bitterness inside her was growing faster than she could control. The apologies that once came quickly became less frequent. Eventually, they disappeared altogether. Year after year, Angela continued climbing higher in her career. Her hard work and recognition, her dedication and promotions. People respected her intelligence. They admired her results. One promotion followed another until she eventually became the company manager. On paper, Angela was successful. She was respected, powerful, influential, accomplished. But behind closed doors, she was falling apart. The higher she climbed professionally, the deeper she sank emotionally. The woman who once brightened every room now darkened every room she entered. The woman who once encouraged people now intimidated them. The woman who once spread kindness now spread fear. And the saddest part was that Angela did not even realize what she had become. Somewhere along the way, while trying to survive her pain, she had slowly transformed into the very thing she once hated. Then came that afternoon. An ordinary afternoon that looked no different from every other day. Employees moved about their duties, phones rang, keyboards clicked, conversations filled the air. Nobody knew that before the day ended, Angela's life would change forever. As she walked past the staff cafeteria, a familiar voice caught her attention. It was Cynthia. Angela had no intention of listening, but then she heard her own name. She stopped. "Anna, if you see this woman, you will run away," Cynthia said, laughing. Angela remained still. "What happened again?" Anna asked from the other side of the call. Cynthia laughed even harder. "Madam Angela happened. I have never seen someone so serious in my entire life. This woman never smiles, never jokes, never laughs." Angela felt something tighten inside her chest. She wanted to walk away, but her feet refused to move. "Maybe she's just strict," Anna suggested. "Strict?" Cynthia scoffed. "No, this one is beyond strict. She's scary." The two women laughed. Angela lowered her eyes. Then came the words that struck her harder than anything else. "Honestly, I think she's unmarried." Anna laughed. "Why?" Cynthia replied, "Because no happy married woman behaves like that. Or maybe something is seriously wrong at home." The laughter that followed echoed in Angela's ears. For a moment, everything around her seemed to disappear. The voices, the footsteps, the noise of the office. All she could hear were those words. Maybe something is seriously wrong at home. A tear escaped before she could stop it. Then another. She quickly turned and walked away before anyone could see her. Not because Cynthia had been cruel. Not because Cynthia wanted to hurt her. The truth was much worse. Cynthia was right. Every word was right. Angela entered her office and quietly locked the door behind her. She stood there for several seconds, staring at nothing. Then suddenly, her legs gave way. She collapsed into her chair and began to cry. Not the kind of crying where a few tears fall and stop. This was years of pain finally demanding to be heard. Years of disappointment, years of humiliation, years of pretending everything was fine when it was not. Years of swallowing insults, years of carrying burdens she was never meant to carry alone. Years of smiling in public while breaking in private. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed. "Why?" she whispered through her tears. "Why did I let this happen to me?" The memories came rushing back. Kelvin's insults, Kelvin's criticism, Kelvin's endless complaints, the nights she cried herself to sleep, the mornings she forced herself to smile, the dreams she sacrificed, the confidence she lost, the woman she used to be. For years, she had blamed everyone else. She blamed her staff for being careless. She blamed her workload for making her tired. She blamed her responsibilities for making her angry. She blamed everything except the real source of her pain. But now, sitting alone in that office, she could no longer hide from the truth. The truth stood before her like a mirror. She had allowed one man's cruelty to poison every corner of her life. She had allowed his words to become her inner voice. She had allowed his bitterness to become her bitterness. She had allowed his darkness to steal her light. Somewhere along the way, she had surrendered everything. Her happiness, her confidence, her peace, her kindness, even her identity. Hour after hour, Angela remained in that office. Sometimes she cried, sometimes she sat quietly staring into space. Sometimes she spoke softly to herself. "This is not who I am." A few minutes later, she whispered again, "When did I become this person?" The question lingered in the room. When did she become the woman people feared? When did she stop smiling? When did she stop laughing? When did she stop being Angela? As evening approached, the tears slowly stopped. Her eyes were swollen, her face was tired, her body felt weak. She stood up and walked toward the mirror hanging on the wall. For a long moment, she simply stared at her reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger. There was sadness in her eyes, exhaustion in her face, years of pain written across her features. Angela touched the mirror gently and whispered, "What happened to me?" The room fell silent. For the first time in years, she did not blame Kelvin. She did not blame work. She did not blame life. She simply told herself the truth. Then something changed inside her. It was small but powerful, like the first drop of rain before a storm, like the first ray of sunlight after a long night.
For the first time in years, Angela made a decision. She was tired of surviving. She wanted to live again. She was tired of merely existing. She wanted her happiness back. She wanted her peace back. She wanted herself back. And as she stared at her reflection, Angela made a promise that would change the rest of her life. No matter how long it took, she was going to find the woman she used to be.
That evening, Angela returned home, just as she always did. To anyone looking from the outside, nothing seemed different. She greeted her children warmly, listened as they excitedly spoke about their day, and smiled as they told her little stories that only children find important. She prepared dinner, set the table, and made sure everyone ate well. She helped where she was needed and maintained the same routine she had followed for years. But deep inside, something had changed, something important. The fear that had kept her silent for years was gone. The hesitation that had made her doubt herself was gone. The uncertainty that had made her tolerate the intolerable was gone. For the first time in a very long time, Angela felt calm. Not because her problems had disappeared, but because she had finally made a decision. That night, after the children had gone to bed and the house became quiet, Angela sat alone for a while. She looked around the room that had witnessed years of tears, disappointment, and loneliness. She remembered all the nights she had cried herself to sleep, all the times she had begged to be heard, all the times she had hoped Kelvin would change. Then she took a deep breath. No more, she whispered softly to herself. The clock continued ticking. The house remained silent. Angela waited patiently until everyone was asleep. Then she stood up and walked toward the bedroom where Kelvin was sleeping comfortably. She stood beside the bed for a moment, looking at the man she had once loved with all her heart. It was hard to believe that the same man who had once promised to protect her had become the source of so much pain. Finally, she spoke. "Kelvin, wake up. We need to talk." Kelvin groaned and turned lazily. "Oh, Angela, not again," he muttered without opening his eyes. "Can't this wait until morning?" His voice carried the same irritation he had used for years whenever she wanted to discuss their marriage. He expected another conversation about responsibility, another complaint about his behavior, another opportunity to dismiss her feelings and make her believe she was the problem. But something about her voice made him open his eyes. It was calm, too calm. There was no frustration in it, no desperation, no pleading, no sadness. Angela was no longer asking to be heard. She had already made peace with her decision. Kelvin slowly sat up and rubbed his eyes. "What is it now?" he asked impatiently. Angela pulled a chair closer and sat down directly across from him. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. She simply looked into his eyes. Not with anger, not with hatred, just clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when a person has finally reached the end of their suffering. Kelvin shifted uncomfortably. There was something unfamiliar about the woman sitting before him. This was not the Angela he was used to. This was not the woman who cried when he insulted her. This was not the woman who begged him to listen. This was not the woman who feared losing him. Finally, Angela broke the silence. Her voice was steady. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Silence filled the room. Kelvin blinked once, then twice. For a moment, he simply stared at her. Then suddenly he burst into laughter. A cruel laugh, a mocking laugh, a dismissive laugh. He shook his head as though he had just heard the funniest joke in the world. "A divorce?" he said between laughs. "You? Angela, stop being dramatic." He continued laughing. "You can't be serious." Angela remained silent. The laughter slowly began to fade. Kelvin studied her face. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't crying. She wasn't arguing. She wasn't trying to convince him of anything. For the first time, there was no emotion left for him to manipulate. "Wait," he said, narrowing his eyes. "You're actually serious?" Angela nodded slowly. "I've never been more serious in my life." Kelvin scoffed. "You'll calm down by morning. You always do." Angela stood up from her chair. "No, Kelvin, this time I won't." Something about the way she said it made his stomach tighten. He suddenly realized she wasn't threatening him. She wasn't trying to scare him. She was done. Completely done. As Angela turned toward the door, Kelvin spoke again, but there was less confidence in his voice now. "Angela?" She stopped briefly without looking back. Then she said the words that finally shattered every illusion he had. "My lawyer will contact you." And with that, she walked away. The door closed softly behind her. Kelvin sat frozen on the bed. For years, he believed Angela would never leave. For years, he thought she would continue enduring whatever he did because she loved him. For years, he believed he controlled the marriage. But as he sat there alone in the silence, something happened that had never happened before. For the first time in their marriage, Kelvin was afraid. Reality arrived much faster than Kelvin expected. For years, he had lived under the illusion that Angela would never leave. He believed she would continue enduring his insults, carrying his responsibilities, and cleaning up the messes he created. Even after she asked for a divorce, a part of him still thought she would change her mind. But a few days later, the first call from her lawyer arrived. Then came the documents. Then came meetings. Then came signatures. Suddenly, the marriage he thought would always be there was slipping through his fingers. For the first time, Kelvin realized this was not an argument. It was not a threat. It was not another emotional conversation that would disappear by morning. This was the end. And the moment that reality sank in, Kelvin changed, almost overnight. The man who barely spoke to Angela unless he wanted something suddenly would not stop calling. Her phone rang constantly, morning, afternoon, night. Sometimes she ignored the calls, sometimes she answered, but the conversations were always the same. "Angela, please listen to me," Kelvin would say. "We can work it out." Angela remained calm. "I spent years trying to work it out, Kelvin." "I've changed," he insisted. "People change." Angela sighed softly. "No, Kelvin. People change when they want to become better. You changed because you are afraid." The line would go silent. The man who once ignored her feelings now wanted to talk endlessly. The man who once mocked her tears now sounded desperate. The man who never appreciated her sacrifices suddenly remembered every good thing she had ever done. One evening, Kelvin showed up looking unusually humble. He sat across from her and lowered his head. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Angela looked at him for a long moment. Those were words she had waited years to hear. Yet, somehow, they no longer moved her. "Sorry for what?" she asked calmly. Kelvin hesitated. "For everything." Angela shook her head. "No, Kelvin, tell me exactly what you are sorry for." He struggled to answer, because for the first time, he was being forced to face the truth he had spent years avoiding, the truth that his actions had consequences. "I'm sorry for how I treated you," he finally whispered. Angela nodded slowly. "You should be." Then silence filled the room. Kelvin expected tears, he expected sympathy, he expected the old Angela. But the old Angela was gone. As the days passed, his apologies became more dramatic. "I love you, Angela," he said one afternoon. "I've always loved you." Angela looked at him carefully. There was a time when those words would have melted her heart. A time when she would have believed him without question. But pain has a way of teaching people lessons they can never forget. "Do you really love me?" she asked quietly. "Of course I do." Angela folded her hands. "Then where was that love when I cried myself to sleep? Where was that love when I paid every bill alone? Where was that love when I begged you to treat me with respect?" Kelvin had no answer. because deep down, Angela already understood something he was not ready to admit. He did not miss her. He missed what she provided. He missed the rent she paid. He missed the food that appeared on the table. He missed the comfort of knowing someone else would solve every problem. He missed the security of being carried through life without effort. He missed the lifestyle she built with her hard work. For years, Angela had carried him like a traveler carrying a heavy load on a long journey. Now that load had finally been set down, and Kelvin was being forced to stand on his own feet. The problem was that he had forgotten how. One afternoon, the landlord called regarding the house. Angela handled the conversation as she always had. When she ended the call, she looked at Kelvin and finally said what needed to be said. "You need to leave." Kelvin stared at her. "Leave?" "Yes." "This is my home too?" Angela's expression remained calm. "No, Kelvin, it has been my responsibility. There is a difference." He stood up angrily. "You can't do this to me." For a brief moment, the old Kelvin appeared again, the arrogant man who believed he could intimidate her. But this time, Angela did not flinch. "I pay the rent," she said firmly. "I pay the bills. I have carried this family for years. You need to leave." Kelvin opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, because for once he had nothing to stand on. No authority, no power, no control. The woman he had spent years trying to break was standing before him stronger than she had ever been. The fear he once used against her no longer existed. The guilt he once used to manipulate her no longer worked. The control he once enjoyed had disappeared completely. And so, with nowhere left to hide from reality, Kelvin packed his things and left. As Angela watched him walk away, she felt something she had not felt in years. Peace. Not because the journey was over, the divorce process was still ongoing, the healing was still ongoing, but for the first time in a very long time, she was free. Truly free. Free from the insults, free from the manipulation, free from the burden of carrying a man who refused to carry himself. The woman Kelvin thought he had broken forever had finally reclaimed her life, and she had no intention of giving it back.
Freedom did not instantly heal Angela. Leaving Kelvin had removed the source of much of her pain, but the wounds he left behind did not disappear overnight. Years of emotional abuse had left scars that nobody could see. Some mornings she woke up feeling hopeful. Other mornings she found herself fighting memories she wished she could forget. That was when Angela realized something important. Freedom was the beginning of healing, not the end of it. Healing takes time. Healing takes effort. Healing takes courage. So she made another decision that would change her life. She registered for counseling. Every week, she sat across from a counselor and spoke about things she had hidden inside for years. At first, it was difficult. Some memories were painful to revisit. Some truths were hard to say aloud. One afternoon during a session, the counselor asked gently, "Angela, when was the last time you did something simply because it made you happy?" Angela sat quietly. She searched her memory. Seconds passed, then minutes. Finally, tears filled her eyes. She could not remember. For years, her entire life had revolved around surviving, taking care of everyone else, solving problems, carrying burdens. She had forgotten herself completely. Week after week, she continued the process. She learned about emotional abuse. She learned that constant criticism was not normal. She learned that being insulted daily was not love. She learned that being made to feel worthless was not marriage. She learned about boundaries. She learned that saying no was not selfish. She learned that protecting her peace was not wrong. Most importantly, she learned about self-worth. For years, Kelvin had made her believe she was never enough. Counseling taught her something different. It taught her that she deserved respect, she deserved kindness, she deserved peace, she deserved happiness.
One day, as she sat in another session, her counselor smiled and asked, "Angela, what would you tell a friend if she was living the life you once lived?" Angela thought for a moment. Then she answered softly, "I would tell her she deserves better." The counselor nodded. "Then why don't you deserve better too?" Those words stayed with Angela long after the session ended. Slowly, something beautiful began to happen. The sadness that once followed her everywhere started fading. The anger she carried for years began softening. The bitterness that had poisoned her heart slowly disappeared. For the first time in a long time, she felt lighter. Not because life was perfect, but because she was finally healing. Then one morning, Angela made another decision. She arrived at work and asked that all employees gather for a meeting. The request immediately created curiosity throughout the office. Employees whispered among themselves. Some wondered if there was a major announcement. Others worried someone was about to lose their job. When everyone finally gathered, the room became silent. Nobody knew why they had been called. Angela stood at the front of the room. Looking around, she saw familiar faces. Faces she had worked with for years. Faces she had intimidated. Faces she had hurt. For a moment, she simply stood there. Then she took a deep breath. "I'm sorry." The room froze. Complete silence. Employees looked at one another. Some blinked in confusion. Others wondered if they had heard correctly. Had Madame Angela just apologized? Angela continued before anyone could respond. "For years, I have not treated many of you the way you deserved to be treated." The room remained silent. "I have been harsh. I have been impatient. I have placed unnecessary pressure on people. I have spoken to some of you in ways I should never have spoken." Her voice trembled slightly. "For that, I am truly sorry." Several employees lowered their eyes. Some looked shocked. Others looked emotional. Angela continued speaking honestly. "The truth is, I was carrying pain I did not know how to deal with. But that is not an excuse. My pain should never have become your burden." A young employee sitting near the front wiped tears from her eyes. Another employee smiled softly. Some people still looked stunned. Nobody had ever seen this side of Angela before. When she finished speaking, the room remained silent for several seconds. Then slowly, people began nodding. The tension that had existed for years seemed to melt away. That day marked a new beginning, and from that moment, the transformation became impossible to ignore. The workplace changed. The atmosphere became lighter. Employees no longer walked around afraid of making mistakes. People smiled more often. Conversations became easier. Teamwork improved. Productivity increased. For the first time in years, Angela became approachable. Employees no longer feared entering her office. They came to her for advice. They came to her with ideas. They came to her with questions. And instead of criticism, they found encouragement. Instead of anger, they found understanding. Instead of fear, they found support. Even Angela's appearance began to change. The stress that had once weighed heavily on her face gradually disappeared. She looked younger, healthier, happier. Her laughter returned. Sometimes employees would hear her laughing down the hallway and exchange surprised smiles. Her confidence returned too, but this time it was not the confidence of someone pretending to be strong. It was the confidence of someone who had survived pain and found herself again. Most importantly, her peace returned, and nowhere was that change more visible than at home. Her children got their mother back, the mother they had missed without even realizing it. She spent more time with them. They shared meals together without stress. They told stories. They played games. They created memories. Their home slowly filled with warmth again. One evening, while watching a movie together, one of her children leaned against her shoulder and said softly, "Mom, you smile a lot more now." Angela felt tears gather in her eyes.
She kissed the child's forehead and smiled. "I know," she whispered. "I think I finally remembered how." As the months passed, Angela often reflected on the journey that had brought her there. And whenever she thought about the turning point, her mind always returned to one afternoon, one simple conversation, one careless phone call, one moment that forced her to face the truth. She never told Cynthia what she had overheard that day. She never mentioned the tears. She never mentioned how those words changed her life. Cynthia remained completely unaware of the role she had played in Angela's transformation. But deep in her heart, Angela carried gratitude, because sometimes the people who help save us never even realize they did. And whenever Angela saw Cynthia smiling around the office, she silently thanked her for helping her find her way back to herself. Meanwhile, Kelvin's life slowly began to collapse. For years, he had believed that Angela would always be there to carry him. He thought the roof over his head, the food on his table, and the stability in his life would never disappear. He had taken everything for granted. But now Angela was gone, and reality arrived like a storm he could no longer avoid. The friends he spent countless hours with suddenly became difficult to find. The same friends who laughed with him at parties stopped answering his calls. Whenever he needed help, they were suddenly busy. Whenever he needed support, they suddenly disappeared. One afternoon, Kelvin called a friend he had once spent nearly every weekend with. "Brother, can we meet? I need to talk." The friend hesitated. "I'm a little busy these days." Kelvin forced a smile. "It's important." "Maybe another time," the friend replied before ending the call. Kelvin stared at the phone in silence. For years, he had chosen those friendships over his family. Now they were nowhere to be found. The women he chased also vanished. The attention he once received disappeared the moment his money disappeared. The people he tried so hard to impress abandoned him one after another. Little by little, he found himself alone, truly alone. Without Angela supporting him, reality finally caught up with him. The bills did not disappear. Rent still had to be paid. Food still had to be bought. Responsibilities still existed. For the first time in years, Kelvin was forced to face the very burdens Angela had carried by herself. Financially, he struggled. Emotionally, he struggled. Socially, he struggled. Some nights, he sat alone in silence, staring at the walls of his small apartment, wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly. But deep down, he already knew the answer. He had spent years destroying the very person who was holding his life together. Many times, Kelvin tried to return. Many times, he called Angela. Many times, he showed up hoping she would change her mind. One afternoon, he stood outside waiting for her after work. When Angela approached, he quickly walked toward her. "Please, Angela, just listen to me." Angela stopped and looked at him calmly. "I've listened to you for years, Kelvin." "I've changed," he said desperately. "I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you, but we can start over." Angela was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke softly. "The sad thing is that you only found your voice when you started losing the things I provided." Kelvin lowered his eyes. "That's not true." Angela shook her head gently. "If you had realized my value while we were together, we would not be standing here today." Another time, he called her late in the evening. "Angela, please think about the children." Angela's voice remained calm. "I think about the children every day. That's why I left." Kelvin was silent. There was no argument he could make, no excuse he could offer, no promise that could erase years of pain. Some opportunities only come once in life, and Kelvin had wasted his. Eventually, he realized the truth. Angela was not coming back, not because she hated him, not because she wanted revenge, but because she had finally learned her worth. Angela had forgiven Kelvin. She no longer carried anger toward him. She no longer wished him harm. She no longer replayed old wounds in her mind. But forgiveness did not mean reconciliation. One day, during a conversation about their children, Kelvin asked quietly, "Will you ever give us another chance?" Angela looked at him with kindness, but also with certainty.
"No, Kelvin." "Why?" he asked. Angela smiled sadly. "Because I forgave you, but I also learned from you." Those words ended the conversation. The door remained closed forever. Not out of bitterness, out of wisdom. Angela never stopped Kelvin from seeing his children. She understood that they deserved a relationship with their father. But boundaries existed now. Strong boundaries, healthy boundaries, necessary boundaries. Whenever Kelvin wanted to see the children, arrangements were made. He met them outside Angela's home. Sometimes they went to a park. Sometimes they shared a meal together. Sometimes they spent the afternoon talking and laughing. Angela encouraged the relationship, but she protected her peace. Kelvin never crossed that boundary again, and that was as close as he would ever get. Looking back on everything, Angela finally understood how wrong she had been for so many years. She once believed marriage required endless sacrifice. She believed enduring pain was strength. She believed suffering in silence was proof of love. She believed that if she just tried harder, gave more, tolerated more, things would eventually change. She was wrong. Real love does not destroy. Real love does not humiliate. Real love does not control. Real love does not erase a person's identity. Real love does not make someone feel small so another person can feel big. Angela had lost herself trying to save a marriage that was already broken. She spent years pouring water into a basket with holes, hoping somehow it would stay full. But everything changed the day she chose courage over fear. The day she finally said, "Enough is enough." Because she chose herself, her children gained a happier mother. A mother who smiled more. A mother who laughed more. A mother who was present emotionally and mentally. Because she chose herself, her colleagues gained a better leader. A leader who encouraged rather than intimidated. A leader who inspired rather than frightened. And because she chose herself, she finally gained the peace she had been searching for all along. The peace that money cannot buy, the peace that status cannot provide, the peace that comes from knowing your worth. Sometimes, the most powerful words a person can ever say are, "Enough is enough." And sometimes, healing begins the moment you remember who you are. This story reminds us that emotional abuse can be just as damaging as physical abuse. It teaches us never to allow anyone to make us lose our identity. It reminds us that while pain may explain someone's behavior, it should never be used as an excuse to hurt others. Healing begins when we confront the truth. Setting boundaries is not cruelty, it is self-respect. Children benefit when parents choose healthy environments. Success at work means little if there is no peace at home. Forgiveness does not always require reconciliation. One honest moment can change an entire life. And above all, your worth should never be determined by how someone else chooses to treat you. Angela learned that lesson the hard way. But once she learned it, she never forgot it again.